Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspectives on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, the polls may have closed and former Vice President Joe Biden may be en route to becoming the 46th President of the United States of America, but due to the bitter political and legal turmoil engulfing the US right now, the world is still some way from knowing who the next president will be for certain. I'll be discussing what the outcome will mean for Britain with our business correspondent Simon Pusey. We'll also be getting reactions from Greg Swenson, a spokesperson for Republicans overseas, William Barnard from Democrats Abroad UK, and we'll be hearing from author Yaron Brook in Puerto Rico. Make sure you stay with us. Until then, let's focus on our first topic, Brexit. The UK's contentious divorce from the European Union still remains a topic of much discussion, and there are just 8 weeks left until the end of the transition period. Talks between Brussels and Downing Street wrapped up this week, and there is still no deal. Further negotiations are expected to take place in the British capital over the weekend. Earlier this week, the Irish Foreign Affairs Minister Simon Coveney tweeted that a trade deal is far from certain. Both sides are yet to reach an agreement on fisheries, which remains one of the biggest stumbling blocks to reaching a deal. As to be expected, there is speculation that the result of the US election will play a part in these crucial final weeks of negotiation. Britain's Foreign Minister Dominic Raab said on Wednesday that the relationship between the two nations would remain strong, whoever won the US presidency.
Look, it's a very close election. We're watching with great interest. It's for the American people to decide, and ultimately, whatever the election night comments from either side of the campaign, I'm confident and have full faith in the US institutions, the checks and balances. This is clearly, though, a much closer election than was expected. And I think in those circumstances, and you're right, I'm sure it will be tense and a lot of biting fingernails depending on which side you are in the US, but we'll wait for the definitive result, and we have full faith in the American system to produce one. It may take days rather than hours, so we'll just have to be a bit more patient, but we'll be there, willing to and able and enthusiastic to work with our American friends and partners, irrespective of the outcome of the race in effect.
For more on this, I'm now being joined by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, if we can for a second just leave the political and legal turmoil aside that's kicking off stateside and focus on a Biden administration and what it would do for Brexit. You touched upon this last week.
Yeah, well, let's start off with the fact that Trump and Boris have been very close since Boris Johnson was elected as British Prime Minister. Boris, when he was elected, said he's a good guy, he's a friend of mine. I know Donald Trump says lots of people are friends of his, but it does seem like they are quite similar in many ways. They're sort of big characters, showmen, it's all about them kind of thing. And, I think they like each other and they like each other's policies in many ways. Trump especially has backed two of Boris Johnson's key policies, really, one being Brexit and the other being a big trade deal with the US, which obviously hasn't emerged yet. So I think if Joe Biden wins, generally assuming you can say that Boris is a bit of a loser in that context because he's aligned himself so closely with the Donald Trump administration. Joe Biden obviously opposed Brexit, and he came out during the campaign trail saying that he wouldn't like Boris Johnson to do anything that may disrupt the Northern Irish peace deal. And that, of course, is really pointing towards the UK's controversial internal market bill, which Boris is trying to push through. Interestingly enough, he does have Irish descent, Joe Biden. So there is a bit of a UK angle there. While a Biden presidency could create challenges for Johnson's administration, the two governments would probably find common ground on various things like Iran, which Donald Trump was obviously pulled out of that big thing that was signed by Barack Obama, and also issues surrounding climate change. Next year, the UK is hosting a huge climate conference called the COP26. Lots of countries coming to that. If they had strong backing from America, and if they had a president that really took climate change seriously, that could be a huge boost to those kind of things. So I think that there's a whole range of things really here that this could influence, and obviously Brexit being one of the main ones. I think, like I said last week, I think Boris Johnson and the UK government would really push much harder than they are at the moment for a deal with Europe if Joe Biden wins, because then they don't have their huge supporter who's pushing for a trade deal, which is Donald Trump.
Gosh, thank you for that, Simon. I suppose next week we'll see how this unravels even further.
Thank you.
It's been an extraordinary few days. On the eve of the election, Democrats, pollsters and forecasters were sure that the former Vice President Joe Biden would cruise to victory. Then he lost Florida early. Hoped-for gains in places like North Carolina evaporated and Democrats began panicking. In the small hours, Donald Trump seemed within sight of a remarkable comeback. But though the polls overestimated him, Mr. Biden is now ahead. Let's speak now with Professor William Barnard, a longtime Democratic activist. Bill is a former chair of Democrats Abroad UK and former international treasurer of Democrats Abroad. It has been a really intense 72 hours, but if things keep going the way they should be going, then it does appear as if your man, Joe Biden, will have the keys to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. What's your initial reacts?
You know, indeed, it has been a rather roller coaster. For those who went to bed Tuesday night, I didn't. I stayed up all night and then all day yesterday. But those who went to bed Tuesday night went to bed thinking that we'd been defeated and that there was no pathway to victory. When you woke up on Wednesday morning, it was quite a different scene, and it still is. If we carry Nevada and Arizona, Nevada says they won't report until tomorrow, but nonetheless, if we carry those two where we are ahead, then it's all over, and it doesn't matter what Pennsylvania and Georgia do. On the other hand, if we lose either one of those, and then win in Georgia, where the margin has narrowed to roughly 20,000 votes, with 300,000 still out to be counted, then we win as well. Or if we carry Pennsylvania, where the margin has gone from 650,000 for Trump on Tuesday evening to something like 100,000 at the moment.
Got to tell you, especially here in the UK, there's lots of attention being focused on the fact that the incumbent is citing electoral fraud. And I've been speaking and listening to Republicans and Republican supporters. But where do you draw the line? When are we expecting some of these big Republican statesmen and women to come out and say, that's enough, you know? Yes, you are the president of the United States, but you don't hold the keys to the Constitution. This was a free, fair election, and enough is enough. Stop citing so much divide and hate. Will we expect that? What is going to give? What are you expecting over the next coming days?
There are two things to note. You haven't had any major spokesman for the Republican Party or the Republicans in the states come out and support Trump's allegations, which are totally unfounded. What you have had is the beginning with Senator Rob Portman from Indiana, for example, even Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, the Senate Majority Leader for the Republicans, come out and make very clear, and even Vice President Pence yesterday, last night, when they had that press conference, distanced himself from the president's comments. So I think the Republicans as a whole don't buy into, decent Republicans and serious leaders don't buy into the fraud charges that are being brought. There's no evidence of that whatsoever.
No evidence of that yet, but it's all still to play out, isn't it? We are going to expect to spend a lot of time watching the Supreme Court. But William Barnard, for now, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Thank you.
Right too.
America appears to be heading towards a fresh political crisis that could last many weeks due to these multiple challenges that will make its way to the US Supreme Court, where the Conservatives have a 6-3 supermajority. Joe Biden is on the brink of winning the US election, but incumbent Donald Trump has already falsely claimed victory, setting the stage for a court fight. Joining me now for more on this is Greg Swenson, founding partner of Bridge McAdam, an African-focused investment banking firm. Greg is also a spokesperson for Republicans Overseas UK. Greg, thanks so much for joining me back on the show. To call the past 72 hours heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching is an understatement. It appears your man's out. What's your initial reacts?
Well, of course I'm disappointed. I don't think he's out yet. You know, it's almost like a game, a sporting event. You know, it's not over till the clock runs out. But, you know, I'd rather be in the vice president's shoes right now than the president's. You know, the Vice President Biden has several more paths to victory. Whereas the president has a fairly narrow path. I know that word's been beaten to death, but I think that the president has a chance. They're going to continue continue counting ballots in Arizona. So if Arizona flips from Biden to Trump, then I think Trump has a decent chance at winning if he can win in Pennsylvania as well.
We spoke this time last week, Greg, and I think I started off my question quoting an Economist poll that had an overwhelming Biden victory. You said that It was ridiculous. It appears to be ridiculous because there was no blue wave. It appears as if Trump has trumped up support in the rural areas. Biden seems to have claimed the heart and soul of the city. What does this tell us about the state of America right now? Because whoever you wanted to win, it is deeply polarized.
Yes, polarized is a pretty good way of describing it. And I think, we've seen some of the data already from the election, and you're absolutely right. The Democrats do very well on the coasts. They do well in the urban areas, whereas the president has cast a little bit of a wider net. Interestingly enough, the only demographic that he went down in versus 2016 was white Americans, and he improved his standing with just about every other demographic, if not all of them. So I think he's cast a wider net. I think it's important to have, to be the party of the big tent and not just depend on, very, very focused demographics or geographics. But Juliana, you're right. It's very polarized right now. There's really kind of a choice in the election between, sort of the progressive left, the militarized progressive left, as opposed to the, more traditional conservative arguments. But I think what's impressive about the results is, first of all, Biden, if he wins, is considered a more moderate politician than a lot of the other people in the party. And even though, much of his administration will include, I would think, some of the people from the progressive left, I think with the Republicans keeping the Senate and also picking up a handful of House seats, I think it's going to encourage the vice president, or if he's President Biden, to govern more from the center, to govern and try to bring a consensus together instead of just pushing through the sort of progressive, very left-leaning wing of the party.
I appreciate your response there, Greg, because it kind of tells nicely into my next question, because I was going to say, I know you're a Republican fan, but whether you like it or not, early on, the president did falsely declare victory. He did. We saw it on stage. And some are saying he's potentially incited violence. I'm sure you've seen the scenes, I have, my viewers have, of MAGA supporters, chanting and decrying outside some electoral polling stations. There are some suggestions that if he does lose, he may not want to leave office. Where does the balance lie between being a Republican, being a Trump supporter, but believing in democracy, believing in the Constitution of the United States, believing in brand America? The world is watching.
Sure. Look, there's no doubt that it's not up to the president whether he accepts the results or not. First of all, he will. He's clarified that before. But I think that the media sort of grabs onto these moments where his messaging isn't perfect. And I surely admit that speech the other night had plenty of flaws. But what's important is he will definitely acknowledge a free and fair election regardless of the outcome. There's no doubt about that. And when you see these kind of protests or rallies, where some of the voters or supporters of the president have been either protesting, or it's probably exaggerating. It's more just exercising their right to free speech. It's silly. I don't pay attention to the inflamed rhetoric. What's important is there's no violence, and that's what I think is notable about these things. If you want to air your grievances on the public square, that's your right. That's fine. You can even burn the American flag. I mean, that's how serious the freedom of speech is in the United States. I might not advocate that, but it's permitted, and so. We're not seeing any violence. I hope there is none. People and especially businesses were boarding up their businesses in New York and Washington over the weekend in anticipation of the urban violence that we've seen all summer from the far left movements, and I think that's unfortunate. But so far so good. I hope everybody just stops with the inflamed rhetoric and just sticks to the rule of law.
Absolutely. It's a great way to end it there. I suppose in the next coming days, time will tell who is going to be the next president of the United States. Greg Swenson from the investment firm Bridge McAdam, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Juliana. Great to be here.
Thank you. Coming up on Channel's Business Global, more reactions on the US presidential election result with author Yaron Brook. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channels Business Global with me, Juliana Olejinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be discussing the ongoing fallout from the disputed US presidential election with author and activist Yaron Brook. In the meantime, here's some company news for you. The supermarket delivery firm Ocado has sharply raised its forecast for full-year profits as the COVID-19 pandemic drives a surge in online food shopping. In September, the company's retail division began selling Marks & Spencer food, and underlying profits are now expected to be more than £60 million. This compares with expectations of £40 million less than 2 months ago. Following that announcement, shares in Ocado rose 8%, making it Monday's top riser on the FTSE 100. Associated British Foods, the owner of fast fashion retailer Primark, has issued a statement predicting it will lose £375 million due to the coronavirus lockdowns across England and Europe. In light of increasing restrictions on retail trading in countries across Europe due to COVID-19, Primark states that currently 19% of its total retail selling space is temporarily closed in the Republic of Ireland, France, Belgium, Wales, Catalonia in Spain and Slovenia. Australia Post boss Christine Holgate has walked away from her $1.5 million a year position over a Cartier watch scandal, foregoing her right to a 6-month $700,000 payout. The embattled chief executive has been under scrutiny since it was revealed Cartier watches worth almost $20,000 were gifted to 4 senior staff in 2018 after they secured a deal with the banks. Her decision to forfeit the hefty payout comes after her predecessor, former Australia Post CEO Ahmed Fahour, walked away with $8.7 million worth of bonus payments and superannuation on top of his $2 million salary. Right, now we continue with our main topic, the legal and political fallout from this week's US presidential election, which is projected to reveal former Vice President Joe Biden as the 46th President of the United States. Author and activist Yaron Brook joins me now from Puerto Rico. Yaron Brook, thanks so much for joining me on Channels Business Global. My goodness, 2020 was already a roller coaster. Then you've got the US presidential election week. It's now biting. When do you think they're going to finally call it for Joe Biden?
It's so hard to tell. I mean, they'll probably call it in later today, but then there are going to be challenges. There are already lawsuits going on in Arizona, in Georgia. They want to recount in Wisconsin. They'll probably ask for a recount in Michigan. So who knows when we'll get a final result? And it could, I'm not sure how exactly, on what basis, but it could still go through the courts and ultimately land up with the Supreme Court.
I've been speaking with spokespeople from the Republican Party, from the Democrats earlier on in the show, and I asked them both, you know, it's a delicate balance between loving Donald Trump, loving the party, but when are people going to finally come out and support the Constitution, support democracy? And I'm talking about the big statesmen and women from the Republican Party. Sure. As some people are saying, well, the British media is certainly saying, that President Trump is inciting violence.
Well, I mean, he's claiming this is fraud, which is really, really bad. And I agree with you completely. At some point, the leaders of the Republican Party are going to have to step forward and say enough is enough. You lost. It's time out. Now, you know, let's not be premature. There's still votes to count, and we don't know that he's lost, but it's very, very likely at this point. And at that point, they're going to have to find a way to escort him out and to get him to admit that he's actually lost. But this is the problem they face. He is unbelievably popular among Republicans. Look how well he did in spite of the polls, in spite of Corona, in spite of everything. He got people to vote who've probably not voted before Republican. He's gotten people to vote in numbers that nobody imagined he could be able to get. And what Republicans are afraid of doing is alienating those voters. They want to capture those voters for future elections, and they're afraid that if they come out too strongly against Trump, they lose the voter support. And that's what's really holding it all back, and that's why everybody is hesitating.
So where do we go from here, Yaron? It's interesting you mentioned that about the Republicans being scared to speak out against the MAGA supporters. And we've had these similar scenes in different parts of the world. We've had it with Brexit, and the media appear to find it so difficult to relate to those that wanted to leave. Why did the pollsters get it so wrong? Why is it so hard for American media and commentators to respectfully respect Trump supporters?
Because there is such a cultural divide in America today. There really is. I mean, this difference between people who live in the cities and who embrace kind of city culture and a more liberal culture, and people outside of the cities that are clearly more conservative, feel alienated by the culture in the cities. It's also true that a lot of what's happening is that these different groups are being defined by their worst elements. So many Americans today define the left as the rioters in Portland last night burning stuff down. I mean, whatever Donald Trump is doing, there's no excuse to go down, burn down stuff because you're not happy with an election result. And of course, the left views the right as these xenophobic, racist, white supremacists. So you've got these, they're both being defined by their worst elements. Whereas on policy issues, there are very few differences between most Americans. Most Americans are solidly, I think, in the center. There are a few issues in which they violently disagree, but on most issues, they're in agreement. And, the parties have allowed these extremes to define them, and that is a real problem. How do you bring them together? I don't know. I don't think Joe Biden is the man to do it. I don't think he has the charisma and the standing to do it. We're going to have divided government, which is probably good for the country. So Biden can't get everything he wants, and a lot of his less popular policy proposals are not going to pass because the Republicans, it appears, are going to control the Senate. So we're going to have divided government for another 4 years. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. It could be an opportunity to bring people together, but it's unlikely. I think the divides, we're still defining who's on the other side by the worst elements on that side. And I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Thanks for that thorough analysis there. I've got to ask you about Brand America. A lot of our viewers are in Nigeria, and I'm telling you, African Twitter was watching this unravel with amazement because so often our American politicians looking at their elections and crying foul play. A lot of people were just shocked and astonished, pretty embarrassed on behalf of the American people to just see how it was all playing out. Is Brand America dead? It was almost dying before Trump. Is it over, and can it be resurrected?
We will see. It's definitely dying. It's on its deathbed. I mean, what America needs is a Ronald Reagan type personality. Somebody who can bring the country together, somebody who can lay out a vision, somebody who can articulate the case for why America is still potentially a shining city on a hill and a model for the rest of the world. Our election system to a large extent is broken. They need, why not apply 21st century technology to elections? Let's use, I don't know, the blockchain or something to have secure, instant, quick elections that people can use their computers to do. America can still recover, but it's going to be very difficult because the fundamental spirit of this country, and I think that was reflected in Donald Trump's presidency, the fundamental spirit of the people in this country is broken. They've lost what it means to be America. They've lost that spirit of liberty, that spirit of freedom. That's, I think since the financial crisis, we don't believe in our markets anymore. We don't believe in capitalism anymore. America is, as an ideal, this idea of a capitalist country that is focused on individualism, not on tribalism, that is focused on progress, on success, on growth, on everybody rising through their own effort. And over the last 50, 60 years, that has been eroding, I think, partially as the welfare state has grown, as the role of government has become bigger and bigger and bigger. And America has become, politically and economically more like Europe than like America used to be. And until it recaptures that spirit, I don't see anybody on the political horizon right now who is capable of recapturing that spirit. But until it does, yes, Brand America, what does it mean anymore? Is it different than France or the UK or any other kind of Western European country in its policies, in its economics? and in its politics, it seems as broken as Europe right now. I mean, Europe is not in no great shape either. So we're looking around the world, and what is the model for Nigeria to look up to? What is a model for some of these African countries to look to as where they would like to move forward towards? For much of the developing world, it used to be the United States of America. It's sad if that is going to go away.
Absolutely. Yaron Brook, what a pleasure to have you for that thorough analysis as we expected. Yaron Brook, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.